I mentioned soil and the importance of soil, so I want to branch into that and talk about it more in depth. So for soil, I'll kind of go into the things that we'll be looking for on a soil test, but I want to talk about how we identify these different nutrients or components first, and that's going to be through a soil test. And so for a soil test, you're going to use something like a soil probe. You can technically use a shovel, but a soil probe will kind of get you the depth you need and be a little bit more accurate. And so in here, I'll put down that you should have a soil, some people call them a soil core or shovel. And for that, what you're going to do is you're going to sample different parts of your pasture, and you want to evaluate different things like pH, nutrients, organic matter. And when I'm sampling, we want to take around 10 to 20 subsamples. And we're going to go in this random zigzag shape. So I'm right on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. So there's a bit of a war whether that shape is an M or a W. But as long as we're going in this zigzag, so here they kind of indicate soil sampling at these 5 different places. But I would also add one kind of on those stretches in between. And when we're sampling, we're going to sample to a depth of 2 to 4 inches deep. We want to only get that topsoil because that is what the fertilizer is going to impact, and that's where our roots are going to primarily be. We'll remove any I don't even want to say topsoil. We're going to remove any dead grass or leaves, anything that isn't soil from our soil sample, and then you can send it into a lab for testing. A basic test ends up, I would say, probably closer to $20 now. And a lot of these labs will have these bags for you. You fill it up to the designated line and you send it in. You want to make sure that you're keeping it out of the heat, you're keeping it out of the sun, you're sending it in as soon as possible. I have a little cooler when I'm doing my soil sampling that I stick it in. I don't have ice packs or anything in there, but then I just get it out to the lab right away after I'm done sampling. And so when I get that soil test back, I'm going to look at a few things like organic matter, soil pH, and soil nutrients. And so the organic matter is going to be important because that's the fraction of the soil that consists of plant or animal tissue in various stages of breakdown or decomposition. And so with that organic matter, this is going to be this organic carbon-based compound, and I want to see it in the 3 to 6% range. And some of the benefits that I'm seeing from having the proper amount of organic matter is it enhances stability to reduce runoff, improves soil aeration, improves water holding capacity, holds onto nutrients better, provides food for microorganisms in the soil. But overall, what we're seeing is stronger roots. Our perennials are just healthier. What we can see is using perennials can help improve organic matter, not overgrazing. So think of overgrazing as going to just continue to deplete nutrients and from that soil that the organic matter holds on to. Adding compost or manure is going to be a way to improve that organic matter. And as I've said in the past, I prefer not to add manure because of the parasite issue, but we're just going to say top dress with 1/4 to 1/2 an inch of compost annually is going to really help increase that organic matter. And so microorganisms in the soil are going to be catalysts. So they help stimulate these nutrient releasing processes to help our plants get the nutrients they need. So having adequate organic matter, I also like to think about it as kind of this sponge. It's a sponge for water, a sponge for nutrients. It holds on to the things the plant needs. So to give you maybe a visual comparison, a soil that's going to be low in organic matter would be sand. So think of sand. Think how everything just runs right through it. It just washes away. Versus our kind of true dirt soil. Think of adding that, decomposed manure on top of it, right? That's our sponge. That's what we want it to be more like. We then can look at our soil pH. That would measure acidity or alkalinity of the soil, and that impacts the solubility of minerals and nutrients, which is why it's important. So those nutrients might be iron, manganese, zinc, copper, cobalt. So when I'm testing for pH, whether it's a grass or legume pasture is going to alter these recommendations. So it's a pretty wide range for my grasses at about a pH of a 6 to 7, so slightly more acidic. Whereas alfalfa is going to be, our legumes will be closer to 6.5 to 7. We kind of aim for that 6.8 mark. But paying attention to that pH, again, will be beneficial for those nutrients. And if I have a too acidic of a soil, I want to add lime. And so you get a fine grade lime and incorporate it. Ideally, but you can top dress if you need to. Then what you can do is if you need to decrease the pH, which is normally not a problem, you can add organic matter. So we might see that organic matter pull down that pH a little bit, depending on the components of that organic matter. So those are some things that you can consider, but adding that organic matter just for the pH is probably not going to be very cost effective. Then the last thing is going to be our soil nutrients. So N, P, and K are going to be our main ones that you hear about. N being nitrogen, P being phosphorus, K being potassium. And so nitrogen is going to typically be the most limiting nutrient unless you have a legume pasture, which we're typically not grazing our horses just on alfalfa. But the reason I say that is because we do have our alfalfa, our clovers. They fix most of those nitrogen needs from the air through these nitrogen fixing nodules. So our legumes do not need the extra nitrogen compared to our grasses. But because nitrogen is the most limiting, it's also not very stable. And so as a result, we try to apply it in 2 separate applications during the year to improve yield. Phosphorus, potassium, those are stable. So sometimes you only need to apply them every other year, and that's only if your pasture needs it. But nitrogen is not going to last very long in the soil. So often we fertilize in spring and early summer. It depends on where you are getting your recommendations. I've heard a few different things in terms of fertilizing, but we'll talk about that a bit in fertilization timing. So you fertilize nitrogen twice a year, phosphorus and potassium only once a year. And what you want to do is you want to wait for at least half an inch of rainfall, or 2 to 3 weeks time in the absence of rain, to allow your horses to graze after fertilizing. Typically, my thought is I don't want to see the fertilizer granules, and that's just, if the horse is consuming it, especially the nitrogen, it could just be unhealthy for them. So when I'm going to fertilize with these nutrients, I want to avoid fertilizing before a dry spell, as it can burn the grass, or a large storm event. So think of different types of precipitation, right? We can have this nice calm rain that just kind of soaks into the ground, looks really nice. Or if you're having this downpour, that water is often rushing across the surface of the ground and just kind of moving wherever it can. And those large storm events are going to probably be sweeping our fertilizer away, versus when the rain just soaks into the ground, it helps that fertilizer also enter the ground where we put it, where we want it to go. So as a result, we want to fertilize prior to a gentle soaking rain. That sounds so peaceful, doesn't it? And so I mentioned there are a few strategies in terms of how the timing that you would fertilize. So the University of Minnesota, that recommendation is that we end up fertilizing in spring. So as soon as, we no longer have snow on the ground, as soon as we're able to put it, we get those nutrients available. And then early summer. And so that is the thought there of let's get it to them right away at the beginning of the year when they need it, and then let's give it to them. So for us, our spring is like a late April is when I'd probably do the first one, and then early summer would be like June. And that's because I want to avoid, so July, August, when I'm going through, we often see these periods of drought or really hot weather when the grass isn't going to be growing, it's kind of going dormant. Well, why put the fertilizer in when the grass isn't going to be using it? However, Rutgers has an interesting strategy where they would rather do it early summer and early fall. And personally, I gravitate towards this recommendation. And that's because when I've often fertilized in the spring, that's how I started because that was the recommendation. And I have way too much grass. I am mowing grass. We have to go and clean it up so it doesn't lay on top of everything and kill everything else. So why am I applying fertilizer in the spring when the grass is growing the most and my horses can't keep up with it? Instead, what I've been doing is I wait till early summer because that's when, the grasses might be slowing down a little bit, but they're still growing, and giving them that nutrient boost can help improve that productivity. I then wait again till early fall because now we're at the end of the season. A lot of these nutrients have been depleted. And again, I give them one more boost to maximize my grazing throughout the fall and to extend it as long as I can. If I front load it, especially in the spring in a time where I don't really need that extra growth, maybe that's a little bit of a waste of my time and money. So you can do what works for you, but remembering to only fertilize in times that we are seeing growth, and ideally in times that you want to boost growth, that you need to improve that forage. But your soil test will tell you what you need. So it's not just like go throw all these things on there, and I'll tell you how to read a soil analysis and then determine how to test your soil accordingly. But don't fertilize your new seedlings until they've gotten some growth. So we want to wait at least a couple of weeks before we're fertilizing, and that's just going to be important so we don't just burn them out and kind of kill them. So I don't know exactly the amount I want you to have here, but just let's just say until they mature. So I believe it's like around 6 to 8 weeks at least, so a couple of months. But sometimes people will fertilize before they put new seedlings down so that fertilizer can be incorporated into the soil so the new seedlings can use it as they're developing. But so it's incorporated so it's not burning the new seedlings or disrupting the seed. And then I've created a little table down here for you guys that it goes through organic matter, pH, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, how much we want in the soil, and then what we do if it's too low or too high. I do want to put that the ideal range for nitrogen isn't included because our recommendations are solely going to be based off of the grass species, well, the species we have in general. So for our grasses, we're typically at 90 pounds per acre we apply for a grass pasture versus our legumes, we typically aren't applying nitrogen. But that's just going to be blanket recommendations based off of the pasture species you have.